The town of Eldermere had always carried a whisper of mystery, nestled between towering, ancient forests and rolling green hills that stretched as far as the eye could see. A quaint yet enigmatic place, it bore the scars of time in its cobbled streets and weathered buildings, each telling a story long forgotten by most. The townsfolk, though seemingly ordinary in their daily routines, were bound by an unspoken rule to never wander too far into the woods after dusk. It was a rule passed down through generations, reinforced by hushed voices and wary glances, but rarely explained. Some called it superstition, a relic of a bygone era, while others heeded it with solemn reverence, knowing that some secrets were best left undisturbed. Among the residents of Eldermere was Daniel Grayson, a young man in his late 20s with a sharp mind and an insatiable curiosity. A journalist by profession, Daniel had spent the past few years chasing stories across the country, always drawn to the inexplicable and the unknown. He had returned to Eldermere, his childhood home, seeking solace after the loss of his father. But as much as he longed for comfort in familiar surroundings, he could not ignore the eerie undercurrent that ran through the town, the way conversations would suddenly shift when he asked too many questions about the past, or the way certain roads seemed unnaturally deserted even in broad daylight. Something was being hidden, and Daniel intended to uncover it. His return was met with bittersweet welcomes, old friends embracing him with warm smiles, while elders watched with cautious eyes. The Grayson name carried weight in Eldermere. His father, Harold Grayson, had been a respected historian and a keeper of many town records. Yet, there were whispers that Harold had been digging into something best left buried before his untimely demise. Daniel's mother, Evelyn, now lived alone in their ancestral home, a grand yet aging house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a dense thicket of trees. She had grown quieter over the years, retreating into the safety of their home, as if shielding herself from something unseen. One evening, as Daniel sat across from her at the dinner table, he broached the subject carefully. "Mom, before Dad passed, was he researching something?" Evelyn's hands froze over her plate, her expression tightening for a fleeting moment before she forced a smile. "Your father always loved history, you know that," she said, but her voice lacked the usual warmth. "Yes, but I mean something specific. Something that people don't talk about." A shadow flickered across her eyes before she let out a sigh, setting down her fork. "Some things are better left in the past, Daniel. Your father didn't always know when to stop asking questions." Her words only fueled his determination. That night, unable to shake the feeling that his father had uncovered something significant, Daniel ventured into his father's old study. Dust coated the bookshelves, and stacks of papers lay undisturbed on the wooden desk. As he sifted through the documents, a particular notebook caught his eye. It was leather-bound, its pages filled with hastily scribbled notes, maps, and newspaper clippings. One entry stood out, dated just a week before his father's passing. "The Hollow. Something is there. Must find proof before it's too late." The Hollow. Daniel had heard the name before, spoken in hushed tones by the older generations but never elaborated upon. It was said to be a hidden part of the forest, a place lost to time, where people who wandered in never returned. As a child, he and his friends had dared each other to go looking for it, but none had ever been foolish enough to stray too deep into the woods. Now, as he traced the lines of his father's notes, he knew that he had to find it. If his father had believed it was important enough to investigate, then there had to be a reason. As the days passed, Daniel began asking around, probing gently at first, then more directly when met with resistance. The responses were always the same: nervous laughter, dismissive shrugs, or outright avoidance. But he was not one to be deterred. Late one evening, an anonymous note was slipped under his door. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting shaky. "Meet me at the old chapel. Midnight. Come alone." The chapel had long been abandoned, its skeletal remains standing as a ghostly reminder of a time when faith alone was not enough to protect the town. It stood on the edge of the forest, its bell tower long collapsed, its doors barely hanging onto rusted hinges. As Daniel approached under the cloak of night, he could feel the weight of the air around him, thick with something unseen yet tangible. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing against the stone walls, and waited. A few moments later, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was an elderly man, his face lined with age and worry. "You shouldn't be asking questions, boy," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What your father found, it's not meant to be known." Daniel took a step forward. "Tell me what he found. I need to know." The old man hesitated before pulling something from his coat pocket, a locket, tarnished with age. "This belonged to my sister. She went into the hollow 50 years ago. Never came back." Daniel stared at the locket, its intricate engravings catching the faint moonlight. "What's in the hollow?" he asked, his voice steady. The old man shook his head. "Darkness. Something that was never meant to be awakened." He grabbed Daniel's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "If you value your life, leave it alone." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Daniel alone with more questions than answers. But Daniel had never been one to walk away from the truth. If the hollow held the key to his father's research, to the secrets buried within Eldermere, then he had no choice but to seek it out. What he did not know, however, was that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. The city was alive with neon lights flickering against the wet pavement, reflecting distorted images of those who passed by. The rain had not let up for hours, drumming against the rooftops and creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the tension building within Alex. He pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders, his breath visible in the cold air. The meeting place was just ahead, a dimly lit CAF tucked between towering buildings, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside. As he pushed open the door, the small bell above jingled, alerting the few late-night patrons of his entrance. He scanned the room, his eyes settling on a woman sitting in the farthest booth, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Eva looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable. Alex slid into the seat across from her, shaking off the dampness from his coat. "You're late," she murmured, her voice barely carrying over the hum of conversation and the soft jazz playing from the CAF speakers. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his wet hair. "Traffic," he offered as an excuse, but they both knew it was more than that. She studied him for a moment before pushing a small envelope across the table. "Everything you need is in here." "But Alex, this is bigger than we thought. There's more at play than just disappearing data. People are getting hurt." He took the envelope, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. His fingers trembled slightly as he peeled back the seal and skimmed the contents inside: photographs, financial records, and a list of names. Some were familiar. Too familiar. His stomach twisted in recognition. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Eva leaned in, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. "I have my sources. But that's not the issue, Alex. The issue is that if we move forward with this, there's no turning back. They'll come after us." A flash of lightning illuminated the CAF for a brief moment, followed by the rumbling of thunder that shook the windows. The storm outside mirrored the storm brewing within Alex. He had known this job would be dangerous, but he hadn't expected it to reach this level. His grip on the envelope tightened. "We don't have a choice," he said finally, determination hardening his voice. "We either expose this or we let them win. And I'm not about to let them win." Eva sighed, running a hand through her dark hair. "I was afraid you'd say that." She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. "I have a contact who can help, but we have to meet them tonight. We don't have time to waste." Alex picked up the phone and stared at the message on the screen. Coordinates. A time. No name. He met her gaze. "Let's go." The rain had turned into a downpour as they left the CAF, the cityscape now an abstract painting of lights and movement. They hurried down the streets, their footsteps muffled by the water pooling in the cracks of the sidewalk. Alex's mind was racing, trying to piece together the information in the envelope and what it all meant. The names on the list, the financial records, the photographs, they pointed to something far more sinister than a simple data breach. They reached the meeting spot, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The structure loomed over them, its broken windows like empty eyes watching their every move. Eva hesitated for only a moment before pushing the heavy door open. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint scent of oil. Dim light filtered through the cracks in the ceiling, casting long shadows that stretched across the concrete floor. Alex's hand instinctively moved to his pocket, where he kept his only defense, a small but effective firearm. A figure emerged from the darkness, their silhouette barely distinguishable. "You made it," the voice was smooth, calculated. As they stepped into the light, Alex recognized them immediately. "Reese," he breathed, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. Reese had disappeared years ago, presumed dead after a mission gone wrong. Yet here they were, very much alive. "I told you this wasn't just about data," Eva murmured, her voice tight with emotion. Reese crossed their arms, their gaze shifting between the two. "You're in deep, Alex. Deeper than you realize. I assume you've looked through the envelope?" Alex nodded, gripping it tightly. Reese exhaled, rubbing a hand over their face. "Then you know we're dealing with more than just corporate corruption. This goes beyond the company, beyond the city. It's global. And if we don't act fast, it won't just be us who suffer the consequences." Alex felt a shiver run down his spine, and it wasn't from the cold. "What's the next move?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Reese nodded approvingly. "We dismantle it from the inside. But that means infiltration. That means risk. And it means trusting each other completely." Their gaze locked onto Alex's, searching for any hesitation. Alex took a deep breath, pushing aside his doubts. "Then let's get to work." The sound of distant sirens filled the air, a reminder that time was not on their side. The storm outside raged on, but within the warehouse, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would change everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the quiet town, a sense of resolution filled the air. The echoes of past struggles had finally settled, leaving space for reflection and growth. The characters who had once been entangled in a web of uncertainty now stood at the threshold of newfound understanding. The journey had been arduous, marked by trials that tested their resolve, but in the end, they had emerged stronger, wiser, and with a renewed sense of purpose. The conflicts that once loomed like dark clouds had been faced head-on, and though not all wounds could be erased, the scars became reminders of resilience rather than defeat. Standing on the old wooden bridge overlooking the river, Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The gentle rush of the water below mirrored the flow of emotions within her. She had spent so long searching for closure, for answers to the questions that haunted her. And now, with the pieces finally falling into place, she understood that closure wasn't always about finding all the answers. Sometimes, it was about making peace with the unknown and choosing to move forward despite it. She turned to James, who had stood by her side through it all, and saw the same recognition reflected in his eyes. They had walked different paths, struggled with different burdens, but in the end, their stories had intertwined in a way neither of them had expected. Across town, Mr. Callahan closed the worn-out journal that had chronicled years of silent battles. The weight he had carried for so long now felt lighter. He had spent years locked in the past, shackled by regret, but as he looked out of his window at the people who had become his family, he knew he had been given another chance. He would no longer let guilt dictate his future. He would live, truly live, embracing the moments that mattered rather than drowning in those that had already slipped away. At the community center, laughter echoed through the halls. What had once been a place burdened by division had become a beacon of unity. Differences had not disappeared, but they had been understood, respected. The people who had once stood on opposite sides had found common ground, proving that even the deepest rifts could be bridged with patience and understanding. Change had not come overnight, and it had not come without struggle, but it had come. And that was what mattered. As the night sky stretched above them, a sense of quiet triumph settled over everyone. The challenges they had faced had not been in vain. They had learned that courage wasn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes, It was about the quiet decisions to keep going, to forgive, to believe in something better even when it seemed impossible. The town that had once felt fragmented now felt whole. The people who had once been lost had found their way. And though life would continue to bring its share of hardships, they knew they would face them together. Emily glanced at James one last time before stepping forward. The past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She was ready for whatever came next. As the town lights flickered in the distance and the stars above shone with unwavering brilliance, one truth became evident: the story was never about the struggles themselves, but about the strength found in overcoming them. And in that moment, as the night embraced the town in its quiet serenity, it was clear this was not the end. It was a new beginning.